We live in a not okay world. We have all been hurt. We have all inflicted hurt. We all need forgiveness, and we all have somebody in our life who needs our forgiveness. Last weekend, we talked about the miracle of the cross. We talked about the cross being the way that God's battle plan for defeating good and evil. But not only that, it was God's plan for you and me experiencing the combination, that miracle of truth and grace on the cross into something that we call forgiveness. And the greatest miracle of the cross is that because you and I have been forgiven, we ourselves can forgive others. Now, I've heard lots of reasons and excuses from people on why they can't forgive someone. And the biggest thing is because they don't deserve it. And I get that. But the truth of the matter is that's the miracle of the cross. God forgave us with grace even though we don't deserve it. So that's not a good enough reason. But another reason I hear is because to forgive someone is to not give those who are victims, or maybe sometimes even yourself or somebody else, the justice they need and the justice they deserve. A man by the name of Louis Wiesenthal was a Polish Jew, survived the German concentration camps. Toward the end of the war, a nurse comes and gets him. So, how will you go to the hospital with me? And I go to the hospital and he finds himself standing at the bed of a young German Nazi who is dying, who wanted to have a Jewish person come and pronounce forgiveness over him before he died because of all the horrible things that he had done. So you have Sam standing right there at this guy's bedside. He had had 89 of his only family members destroyed, killed in those concentration camps by the Nazis. And he's listening to this guy. And he's telling the things that he had done, like putting a couple of hundred Jews into a house, pouring gasoline around it, and then throwing hand grenades in, seeing it explode, burn up in like an incinerator. Then the people who tried to run, even a man carrying kids, and shooting them with a rifle, and this young German had been the one who did that. And so he stood there and listening to those things, just so hard to hear, so hard to bear. And after he'd finished, he just stood there in silence for what seemed like an eternity. And then finally, he just turned and walked out of the room, having said nothing. Later on, he wrote a note to some of his friends and said, "Hey, what would you have done?" And to a fault, every single one of them said, "Man, same thing. I mean, how could you have offered forgiveness on behalf of other people that were brutalized? I mean, no. He got exactly what he deserved." And somebody else quoted an old rabbinic proverb that goes like this: "To offer merciful to the cruel is to be indifferent to the innocent." Now, forgiveness and condoning or excusing are not the same thing. There are a lot of things that are excusable that someone never forgives. But thank God, the unexcusable is not unforgivable. I was with a group of pastors, and we're talking about another particular pastor who had to step down because of misconduct. And there was a lot of difference of opinion there. And finally, somebody said, "You know what, I just think it's time to restore him. Just put him back. I mean, it really wasn't that bad at all, just to forgive him and to move on." That's not forgiveness. Condoning is saying it wasn't a big deal, we kind of need to forgive him, put him on back, put him back in that role. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is naming what was wrong and why it was wrong. It's looking at someone straight in the eye and say, "Hey, listen, this wasn't okay. It's not okay. And here's why it's not okay." Forgiveness definitely involves that. Sometimes people don't want to forgive because they think, "Well, I'm not sure it's really true in my heart. I feel like I'm just going to do it kind of a false way, false motivations," because out of a fear of, if I name the truth, which you have to, and name it, this person's going to push back, it's going to be uncomfortable. So you just kind of appease them and say you forgive them, but you don't really mean it. Winston Churchill talked about that, people who are appeasers. Said appeasers are like people who feed the crocodile just hoping they'll feed them last. Now, forgiveness, it is the opposite of vengeance. The same word for vengeance in the Bible is malice. Malice means to hold ill will against another person. So if I'm going to forgive them, I got to replace my ill will with goodwill. And interesting, that's the definition of love. Jesus said to love your enemies. To love, agape, is to work and will the good in another person's life. But to forgive someone does not mean there can't be justice. Justice means it has to be made right. It has to be fair. It has to be honest. So you can forgive someone and still have justice. There is no tension between forgiveness and justice, but there is tension between vengeance and justice, because vengeance means I still hold on to the ill will, to the harm that person has done unto me. Now I want to speak to you just for a moment about what it really is to forgive and what it is to remember someone in a forgiving sort of way. And it's remembering, it's not forgetting, but it's remembering in a unique way that Lewis Smedes calls redemptive remembering. Somebody needs to write that down, redemptive remembering. And here's what it is. Over here in the book of Deuteronomy, Israel has been delivered out of slavery, the bondage, the cruelty of the Egyptians. And here's what Moses says to them. He's reteaching them something, just like we learned last weekend, that God's having to reteach Israelites things that they have learned that are not how he wanted them to live. So he says in Deuteronomy 4, verse 9, only be careful and watch yourselves. He really says, watch your souls, what it says in the Hebrew, closely, so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen, or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. In other words, sometimes forgetting what has happened can be dangerous. So you need to remember. But then over here in Deuteronomy 5, in the fourth commandment, it says this, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor, do your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, your daughter, your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, even your donkey gets to take the day off, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Here comes the important sentence. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Now, it's not remember how rotten they were to you. It's not remember what they did to you. It's not remember the hatred you had for Pharaoh. Here it comes. And remember that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. That's what you call redemptive remembering. But he doesn't stop there. Over in Deuteronomy 23, he kind of puts a little point into it in verse 7. He says, do not despise an Egyptian. Hey, do not have resentment. Do not hold on to vengeance in any way. Do not despise them. Do not allow it to kind of fester under your skin. Do not allow the cocktail of hatred and hostility and judgmentalism and vengeance. Don't let it brew into your soul. Don't do that. He said, just don't despise an Egyptian. Now, I want you to think for a second about somebody that you find it kind of easy maybe to despise, right? Maybe it's somebody who has different political views than you do. We're in a very hostile season right now. We're approaching election day, and there's somebody that's close to you, and they're just so diametrically opposed to what you think and what you believe, and you feel so strongly, and after all, you're right, correct? I mean, you're the one that's right, and they're wrong. After the last presidential election, I had a woman here in Pathway tell me as she was leaving worship, Pastor, I need to tell you I'm divorcing my husband. I said, and she was serious. I said, why? Well, I found out he did not vote the same way I did. And I just cannot tolerate that. In other words, she despised him for that. Maybe it's somebody for religious reasons, doctrine or some sort of position, it's a social issue with theologically lined up together, and you just can't believe they don't agree the same way you do because you're right, and so you kind of hold that against them. I see that happen all the time as well. That's why they say don't mix politics and religion. Or maybe somebody at work, right? They spoke ill of you. They didn't have your back. And though you're not just really angry with them, you kind of distance yourself from them. And you kind of got a callous over your heart. And you kind of don't, maybe you don't have ill will, but you don't have good will towards them either. Or maybe it's somebody in your family. They really hurt you. You know what's interesting? The people that hurt us the most are the people that we love the most. And sometimes it's hard to really, truly forgive them and just move on and want good in their life. I want you to think of someone in your life that is easy for you to despise. Now go back to the message this past weekend. God sent his son Jesus to die on the cross for them, even though they didn't deserve it. No, they don't deserve it. They don't, but the miracle of the cross is The cross, the power of the story of the cross is that God combines His truth and His grace combined to give you and me forgiveness. And the true miracle happens when we who are forgiven are able to forgive others. Now, if you're still struggling with the idea of forgiving that person, I want you to remember it's really okay to not be okay.